This is a Fox News alert. We are about a half hour away from the White House briefing, and they are sure to get questions on the Rob Porter controversy after the FBI director seemed to contradict their timeline during his testimony on Capitol Hill today. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Top intel chiefs testifying for hours before the Senate Intelligence Committee about the gravest threats to our national security, including a warning about the Russians and our upcoming midterm elections. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live on Capitol Hill. Catherine.
Thank you, Dana. Throughout the 4-hour testimony this morning, we heard from the chiefs of the U.S. intelligence community, and they took a lot of questions, especially from Senate Democrats, about Russia's interference in the 2016 election, and their assessment is that Russia is still at it.
There should be no doubt that Russia perceived that its past efforts as successful and views the 2018 U.S. midterm elections as a potential target for Russian influence operations.
We also heard testimony from the intelligence chiefs that Russia sees it as a success because it was allowed them, to promote propaganda, use what they call false flags operations, which allows them to have plausible deniability, and it's just relatively inexpensive to achieve maximum results. We heard from the leading Democrat on the Senate committee that they are laying the foundation for more in 2018.
The Russian effort in a new area utilized our social media platforms to push and spread misinformation at an unprecedented scale. Now, we've had more than a year to get our act together and address the threat posed by Russia and implement a strategy to deter further attacks. But I believe, unfortunately, we still don't have a comprehensive plan.
There are also headlines about North Korea. Intelligence chiefs told folks not to read too much into what seemed a rapprochement at the Olympics between North and South Korea. And there was also allegations against China and efforts to usurp the United States as the leading superpower.
I'm not sure in the 240-some-odd-year history of this nation we've ever faced a competitor and potential adversary of this scale, scope, and capacity. That they are carrying out a well-orchestrated, well-executed, very patient, long-term strategy to replace the United States as the most powerful and influential nation on earth.
Just half hour from now, they're going to begin the closed-door classified session with the intelligence chiefs, where what they telegraphed in the hearing earlier is that they would take more questions about the Russia investigation, perhaps even elements of it like the dossier, and then also specifically North Korea and how the U.S. would respond if there was an attack or even a test over the Pacific, Dana.
Well, it's a fascinating hearing, and you sure can pack a lot into a report. Thank you.
I try. Okay.
Appreciate it.
See ya.
At today's hearing, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats sounded the alarm on disruptive cyber attacks. Watch.
Frankly, the United States is under attack by entities that are using cyber to penetrate virtually every major action that takes place in the United States. From U.S. businesses to the federal government to state and local governments, the United States is threatened by cyber attacks every day.
Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley is chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and I'm glad you could join us today. That was a very eye-opening hearing, and they're talking about threats to the United States, North Korea, China, Russia, but in particular this issue of cybersecurity. How do you think the United States government is positioned to deal with those threats?
Not as much as we should be, but it's because we have a free market system. And in a free market system, anybody that's got money, and obviously the Russians have money, they can make use of it. And then, of course, you get into the policy issue of the extent to which you should have government regulation of it. But I don't think there's any doubt that we all feel it's wrong, but not surprising, that Russia wants to help ruin our democracy because they're an autocracy and they don't really believe in the two-party system.
Do you think there's anything concrete that the government should do between now and the 2018 midterms to try to shore up the credibility of our election system?
Yeah. I thought that we were going to get, as far as advertisement on Facebook and Twitter and things like that, that the Federal Elections Commission was going to step in with some regulations that were very important, who was paying for it so we could track it, and that would probably discourage any Russian-related from using those platforms. I hope that that can be done. We could pass laws in this area, but I think it could also be done under existing law and the authority of the Federal Elections Commission.
Sir, if I could turn to immigration, because today I think you're going to start this debate on the Senate side, and you have an amendment called the Secure and Secede Act, or a bill, I should call it. Here's what I think it will do, and then I'll have you tell me more about it. A pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million DACA-eligible immigrants. These are the dreamers we talk about. $25 billion for Border Security Trust Fund, a limit to chain migration, and reallocation of diversity visa lottery. And I think today you've got a big boost because Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he supports this measure. Do you think that it has a chance of passage this week?
I think we're building support for it. Right now, I couldn't say we would have the 60 votes, but I do know this. If anybody who has been advocating for Dreamers and DACA people over the last 10 years never thought they'd get a chance to do it under a Republican Congress, they not only have a chance to do it through a Republican Senate, but probably a Republican House, and for sure, this is probably the only measure that I've heard of yet that could pass the United States, pass the President of the United States. It's a compassionate compromise that I think everybody that wants to give certainty to DACA people could get behind.
Do you think? I've always wondered why the Democrats don't just declare victory and say, look where we've brought the Republicans. We got them to this point. Let's go ahead and pass it and declare victory and go campaign on that if they want.
Yeah, they don't know what they want to do, and that was best exemplified at noon today when Leader McConnell went to the floor and asked for unanimous consent to bring up a couple amendments, and Schumer objected. So why would they be objecting to something that they've been crying about for the last decade? Move ahead with it and do what you said, declare victory.
Well, we'll see what they decide to do. It's going to be a fascinating week. If I could turn to one last subject before I let you go, sir. On your committee, in this investigation into the Mueller investigation and all of that, you found a very curious email that Susan Rice, the former national security advisor, sent to herself. I'm known to send emails to myself, but it's usually things like, don't forget to pack the headphones in your suitcase, so that keeps top of mind. But she sends a note to herself about an important meeting between President Obama and the FBI director, James Comey. What have you asked her about that email, and have you had a response?
We have not had a response, and I would expect one very shortly, though. At least she ought to respond. Number one, why did she do it 15 days after the meeting took place? What was it in reference to? Why was it? And most importantly, the oddity of it, we didn't really go after this email. It kind of showed up as a result of some information we got from the Federal Archives in regard to the Trump-Russia investigation. And so this sticks out as something that we legitimately need answers to. Why did she email herself 2 weeks after the meeting?
So then what is the next step for the committee? I imagine that you would get a response from her, but do you expect to call her back up for any testimony?
I think I better wait and answer that question depending upon what she tells us. I don't particularly like to have hearings if we don't need them. Probably the next step would be if we brought her to before lawyers on the staff for more hearings and get a transcript of it and try to get answers that way. But I would think that she would surely answer our questions. I would hope she would.
I bet, and I'm sure she probably will. Senator, we will check back in with you later in the week to see how immigration is going. Thanks for joining us today. Senator Chuck Grassley.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
Now back to questions swirling around White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and when he knew about the allegations against former Staff Secretary Rob Porter. Let's talk with Bret Baier, anchor of Special Report. Glad to have you here with me because just before we went to air, there was these two reports. One, an anonymous one from Axios saying that there is a movement afoot to possibly oust Chief of Staff John Kelly, saying Chief of Staff John Kelly's White House enemies are ready to use FBI Director Chris Wray's testimony as a weapon. Wray's FBI timeline makes one thing clear. The Kelly cover-up is unraveling right before our eyes. That's from a White House official. Then, not just 20 minutes later, there was a tweet from the Anthony Scaramucci. He was, remember, White House Director of Communications for just a few days, but he's remained an advisor. And he says, based on FBI testimony, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly almost certainly knew about credible allegations of domestic abuse against Rob Porter, and at least 6 months ago, then recently forced others to talk about that timeline. Inexcusable. Kelly must resign. So I wanted to get your take on this, Brett. Does this seem like a coordinated attack to you, or is it much ado about nothing?
Oh, you've been in Washington. It seems and smells like a pretty coordinated attack. The long knives are out for John Kelly. And remember, I mean, Scaramucci is a guy, he was the first one fired July 31st by the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly. So that tweet has to be put in context. The anonymous sources are interesting in that they point to Wray's testimony, the FBI director, and this is a major problem for this White House and the communications team and how they've handled it and the timeline and who knew what when they knew about these allegations about abuse by Rob Porter on his ex-wives and how detailed it was. There's a lot. Remember, this is a 7-day story now.
I know. I was just thinking about that. Because it's unusual, especially in the past 2 years, it's unusual to have a story that carries over beyond 48 hours. Usually these things are superseded by another event. But I think one of the reasons this one sticks around is because, as I remember, if your storyline changes, the press will change it with you. But then there was that interesting report today, and I think this is one of the reasons why the press has kept pushing. Unreported until today, Politico says that there was this off-the-record meeting with the press office and Rob Porter trying to explain things, but they haven't been able to talk about that. And the reporters that were there are saying that they're not going to reveal what was in the meeting, but clearly that's one of the reasons that they've been pushing about the timeline. Right.
There were 4 reporters that were called to an off-the-record meeting with Rob Porter answering questions and asking and answering questions. And defending and giving his side of the story, set up by the White House that, again, soon thereafter, told a timeline where as soon as they found out, Rob Portman essentially resigned. The other issue here is that we are now confirming, Fox News can confirm via multiple sources, that Porter was up for a big promotion in just the day that he resigned, the day before. He was actually being considered for Deputy Chief of Staff. And, you know, that also factors into their timeline of events.
There was one report I saw today that said that perhaps the press office was either out of the loop or they were misled. But I have to say, I don't think that's much of an excuse. And could it be also that John Kelly was not given full information and that there maybe is just human error here, and instead of trying to fire somebody over this, they could all just try to get beyond it. And one of the things I think they could do is to say to the FBI or to the security, whoever is going to clear it, is to say, if we have outstanding clearances, I want them dealt with in the next 45 days. And at that point, if after 45 days it's not resolved, then we will have to take action and move people out. I don't know if they would do that, but it would be a way to get beyond this current news cycle.
Of course. And you know who could say that? Is the President of the United States.
True.
He could come out and in one press, moment, say, 1, I stand against domestic violence in all shapes, sizes, and forms. 2, these clearances need to be finished, done, completed in, as you say, 45 days. 3, I have complete confidence in Chief of Staff John Kelly, or I don't, whatever he's going to say. And the president saying it deals with all of the loose ends of a lot of different people saying a lot of different things.
I'm smiling only because I'm thinking of sometimes it takes Dad to come in and say, stop fighting, everybody's going to get along, and we're going to move past this. We'll keep an eye on it, and absolutely everyone needs to watch Special Report tonight. Brett Baer, thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
So the White House press secretary set to take the podium at the bottom of the hour amid new questions about the administration's timeline on Rob Porter that Brett and I were just talking about. We'll bring that to you live. Plus, Chuck Schumer making a trip to Kentucky with Mitch McConnell, fresh off their compromise on a spending bill, with the 2 Senate leaders finding something they will never, ever agree on. White House Staff Secretary Rob Porter resigning almost a week ago after allegations of domestic abuse by his two ex-wives, and now FBI Director Christopher Wray is contradicting previous White House statements that background checks on Porter were part of an ongoing investigation.
The FBI submitted a partial report on the investigation in question in March, and then a completed background investigation in late July. That is, soon thereafter, we received requests for follow-up inquiry, and we did the follow-up and provided that information in November, and then we administratively closed the file in January.
Let's bring in former White House Deputy Chief of Staff Karl Rove, also a Fox News contributor. Karl, I anticipate that the White House today is going to try to push back on the process point and say that career officials who are a part of the personnel process are to blame for this mishap.
Yeah. Well, it's all confusing because we do know this. On January 25th, Roger Porter's first wife, the woman who claims that she was hit in the face while they were on vacation in Italy and has photographs to prove it, was interviewed by the FBI. So it's hard to believe that that was not included in the March preliminary report and in the July final report that went to the White House, that then caused some questions to be asked that required them to revisit it with a final report in November before they closed the file in January. So probably last March, but no later than July, somebody in the White House knew about the allegations. In fact, Porter himself had prepared the ground for it by telling people in January, oh, there are going to be some ugly things from my former wives. And
then the statement by John Kelly, the Chief of Staff, in support of Porter would not have just come out of thin air. I mean, he would have been asked to put something out like that. And so now there are calls in the midst of all of this, 7 days later, questions about the timeline, for him to resign. I mean, is that a rash measure?
Yeah, obviously. The question is, where did the FBI report go inside the White House? Doesn't look like it went to Kelly. It looks like it went someplace else inside the White House. So who had that report and what was their thinking? And, you know, Kelly and others have said, we didn't know until January. Last Thursday, the Deputy White House Press Secretary goes out and said, well, we just found out about this. This is reaffirmed on Monday by Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So who knew inside the White House, and what kind of judgment problem was there that, oh, yeah, we can have somebody who's been accused by at least two women, two former wives, of beating them, maybe at this point by a third woman that he beat her. Who inside the White House had this sitting on their desk and didn't walk in and say, we got a real problem with this guy?
Well, and as Brett Baer just reported, apparently Fox News can confirm that he was up for a promotion to Deputy White House Chief of Staff. My last question for you, though, is about the number of vacancies that still exist with political appointees, because by all measures, the president's approval ratings are up, tax reform is working, and you have good recruitment for the Republicans, good fundraising numbers, and yet you're not able to actually advance your agenda if 50% of your appointees aren't named. Well,
as this goes back to a pet peeve of mine. The president has said on several occasions that he doesn't want to fill all of those 4,000 jobs that he can fill. 970 require Senate confirmation. The rest are Schedule Cs or other non-confirmable Senate posts. He said, I'm going to save a bunch of money by not filling them. We have a civilian government of 2.3 million federal employees, and the only way that a president can enforce his agenda on that workforce is by filling every single one of those with qualified, able people who are advancing his agenda. And we see agency after agency after agency, in which it's not just simply the people who require Senate confirmation, but even the people that all it requires is somebody making a decision and putting them in the job and putting them in that
They don't all need Senate confirmation.
That's right.
All right. Well, if you care about the deep state, apparently you should worry about this.
You should.
I think. All right. Karl Rove, thank you.
You bet.
More than 100 Russians killed in Syria, and American forces may be to blame. The latest on escalating tensions between the two countries amid the fighting in Syria as we await the White House briefing with Sarah Sanders. A Fox News alert: tensions heating up in Syria after a report that a U.S. airstrike may have killed Russian mercenaries fighting in the war-torn country. More than 100 Russians died in a failed attack on a base held by American and Kurdish forces in a Kurdish-controlled region. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is at the Pentagon. Jennifer, this story really caught my eye. What is the Pentagon saying about this?
Well, Dana, the Pentagon has been reluctant to confirm these reports coming out of Russia that U.S. airstrikes last week killed nearly 100 Russian fighters, wounding up to 300, many of them, as you mentioned, believed to be Russian mercenary contractors. The U.S. struck back with a massive round of airstrikes last week after coming under attack by a battalion-sized pro-Assad unit that many believed contained Russian fighters. In addition, we've just learned today that over the weekend, U.S. forces came under attack for a second time. In response, a U.S. drone destroyed a Russian-made T-72 tank in the same part of eastern Syria where that U.S. base came under attack last Thursday. Today, Mattis downplayed the U.S. drone strike.
This could just be a local couple of guys doing something. I don't want to dignify it as a big attack, okay? It wasn't, but it's still something we're keeping our eye on for the very thing that's in the back of your mind right now.
Mattis was en route to NATO headquarters in Brussels and would not confirm Russians had been killed in either incident. CIA Director Mike Pompeo was asked about this apparent flare-up between U.S. and Russian forces.
We have seen in multiple instances foreign forces using mercenaries in battles that will begin to approach the United States.
He was on the Hill just earlier this morning. Some have described the Russians reportedly killed in the U.S. airstrike as similar to Blackwater contractors hired by the Russian regime. There is nothing to indicate, however, they were uniformed Russian troops, Dana.
So how worried is the Pentagon about getting sucked into what looks to be a proxy war in Syria?
Well, I think the reason you saw such a strong response last week when their base came under attack near Deir el-Zor was to send a message to the Assad regime, Russia, Iran, and Turkey to stay away from U.S. anti-ISIS operations. If you look at the flare-up of incidents in the past week, Israel shot down an Iranian drone based in Syria. Turkey continues to fire on U.S.-backed Kurdish forces in the north, and now Russian units fighting for appear to be testing the U.S. in the east. All of this raising the possibility of a multifaceted proxy war emerging in the wake of ISIS being destroyed in Raqqa, Dana.
All right, Jennifer Griffin, thank you. The man convicted of setting off a pressure cooker bomb in a crowded New York City neighborhood has been sentenced to multiple terms of life in prison. Ahmad Rahimi planted the bomb in Chelsea in 2016. More than 30 people were hurt by flying debris that caused millions of dollars in damages. Rahimi also had planted another bomb in New York that failed to explode, as well as other bombs in New Jersey. The White House briefing is set to get underway any minute as we wait for a reaction to the Senate hearing on global threats and Rob Porter's security clearance process, plus a warning that Russia is ramping up efforts to undermine U.S. elections.
What we are seeing is a continuous assault by Russia to target and undermine our democratic institutions. And they're going to keep coming at us.
We are waiting for the White House briefing to begin as questions swirl about Rob Porter's security clearance and the timeline of it. This as our top intelligence officials say the Russians are at it again, working to undermine the upcoming midterms. Senator Mark Warner urging more action to protect the integrity of U.S. elections.
Secretary of State Tillerson just last week said that we're already seeing Russian efforts to meddle in the 2018 elections. But I believe in many ways we're no better prepared than we were in 2016. Make no mistake, this threat did not begin in 2016, and it certainly didn't end with the election.
Mark Penn was chief strategist for Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. Guy Benson is the political editor at townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. Guy, let me start with you. This is not a new topic, but it's certainly increasing in some urgency when you saw everybody today agreeing at that hearing on world threats that this is certainly one that the United States can expect. Forget relitigating 2016. What is the government going to be able to do to prevent basically a lack of belief in elections going forward, especially just in 8 months from now?
Yeah, that was the point of agreement. But listen to that indictment from Senator Warner. He's saying that we are no better prepared now than we were in 2016 to deal with this menace from Russia. And to me, that is so demoralizing. It underscores, I think, as an American, that our political parties are more interested in this food fight of playing gotcha with the president or playing defense for the president, rather than taking the necessary steps to make sure that hostile powers do not influence our elections into the future. That ought to be the top priority.
Mark, it would seem that this is something that you could get bipartisan agreement on to try to tackle. But is there anything concrete you think that they could have done that they haven't done so far?
Well, look, I think there is a lot of bipartisan agreement on this. I don't think you've seen a plan for election security. I don't think you've seen any actions taken against RT, which really in the intelligence report was seen as a propaganda arm for the Russian government. So I think they could have had something more of a security and propaganda, and also what they said about having Facebook identify the source of ads. All those things could be done. Look, our democracy is strong.
Yep.
I think Americans are more informed on virtually anything today than ever before, so let's keep this in perspective.
Yeah, I agree with that, too. All right, let me take it back to politics for a minute. Why don't you listen to the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, and what he talked about last night in Kentucky.
And we do know that in off-year elections, it's often a referendum on the president. But our mistake, I think, you cannot just run against Donald Trump. And it is the job of we Democrats to put together a strong, cohesive economic group of proposals aimed at the middle class and those struggling to get there.
Mark, some Democratic pollsters are starting to sound the alarm. President Trump's approval ratings are certainly improving in the last 2 months, and Chuck Schumer went on to, you can see it there, up to 44%, which is pretty much where President Obama was for a lot of the last 4 years of his presidency. Chuck Schumer also said that he wants Democrats to focus on issues like affordable college, rural broadband, and child care. Is that going to cut it?
Well, look, I couldn't agree with Senator Schumer more. I think Democrats win on their issues that matter to real people. I think he left health care off that list because I think Democrats had a big win. I think if we see it on health care, child care, all of these key issues, I think this could be a really strong message for the Democrats. We need one like that now.
Right, because, Guy, certainly the Democrats have shown that they have enthusiasm when they're agitating against President Trump. But if you don't have something you are for, then it gets harder. And the Republicans have something to talk about, which is certainly the tax reform bill. And also they point to their favorite nemesis, former Speaker and Minority Leader Speaker Pelosi. And I don't think she's going anywhere.
No, I think Pelosi is a rhetorical punching bag for the entire Republican Party, and for good reason. She's deeply polarizing and unpopular with the American people. But look, I think the Republicans would welcome a fight on the economy. I think it's interesting to see Chuck Schumer saying we need to focus on the middle class when every single Democrat in Congress voted against tax cuts for the middle class. And they predicted Armageddon and all of these, sky is falling disasters. And in fact, 80 to 90% of Americans, including more than 90% of the middle class, are getting a tax cut because of the Republican passed bill that got zero support from his party.
Yeah, Mark, so you can't, the Democrats can't go back and vote again and decide to vote for tax reform. How will they basically push back against these attacks that are coming from Republicans that they couldn't support tax reform that they will say is clearly benefiting the middle class?
Well, as you know, in politics, once something's done, it's more off the table than on the table. So I think the best strategy for Democrats is, look, we've got these tax cuts. They're in place. They in many ways constrain the ability to secure Medicare and Social Security. But what are we doing about health care, education, child care? Those are issues that you never hear Republicans talk about and that they can take straight to the middle class.
So, yeah, to that point, Guy, what are the Republicans going to be able to talk about that they will be doing in the future? They're going to talk about immigration this week, but without a reconciliation process for the rest of 2018, it's probably unlikely that any big major legislation will get passed. So it's a long time between February and November.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Republicans have tied their own hands with this budget deal that busts all these budget caps and puts us on an even more unsustainable fiscal path. And I think that's a problem for the Republicans. As a conservative, I have an issue with it. I do think it is a challenge, though, for Democrats to talk about health care cohesively as a party, because they are very divided on what to do on the issue. Half of them want to defend this failing Obamacare mess for which they are primarily responsible, and half of them want to impose this $30 trillion Bernie care socialized health care program. and they're not really exactly sure, A, how to pay for that, and B, if they want that to be in their platform. I think that's a divisive issue among Democrats.
Well, certainly, right before the State of the Union poll that I think we had here at Fox News showed that health care is definitely on the minds of all voters, Republicans and Democrats, so everyone better get a policy and a message. Mark Penn and Guy Benson, who is surrounded by a lot of books today, thank you for joining me.
Yes, I'm a reader.
All right, as the risk of conflict remains high between the U.S. and North Korea, leader Kim Jong-un is riding high on the possibility of holding diplomatic talks with South Korea. But it remains unclear when and if those meetings will happen. Greg Palcott is live from Seoul, South Korea. What is Kim Jong-un saying about the developments, Greg?
Well, Dana, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is reportedly thrilled with diplomacy here, according to the North Korean state media, upon greeting the North Korean delegation, which returned in the last 2 days, including his sister. He was, quote, very impressed with South Korea's treatment of them and wants to, quote, liven up the warm climate of reconciliation. He's even reportedly turning down the volume on propaganda music the North blasts across the DMZ to the south. We haven't been up there yet, Dana, to confirm that report. We can confirm when we've been up there. It's pretty annoying.
I can imagine. It would drive me absolutely crazy. Greg, we understand that you have some new insights into what President Moon of South Korea is thinking. What's that?
Exactly. It seems that South Korea really wants to reassure the U.S. after the last couple of days. Remember that Kim Yo-chung extended an invitation to South Korean President Moon to come to Pyongyang for that summit. Now, officials close to President Moon telling us on Tuesday that they have their own preconditions before going to that summit, and that includes North Korea talking to the U.S. And this, Dana, syncs with what Vice President Pence said over the weekend that he was told by President Moon. Officials here in South Korea seem to want to at least give the appearance of singing from the same songbook.
All right, Greg Palcott, thank you. American snowboarding star Chloe Kim winning Olympic gold in the halfpipe last night, topping the field with an almost perfect score, tweeting right after, I hate crying, but I'll give myself a pass for this one. Thank you, everyone, for the love. Stoked to bring home the gold. Kim gaining more than 100,000 Twitter followers during her primetime victory. I was one of them. President Trump wants changes to the food stamp program, what he's looking to do, and how a Blue Apron-type program figures into it. Plus the president's 2019 budget, but will any of those proposals ever come to pass?
Look at what the House has already proven our ability to do on entitlements. We have passed every year since we've been in the majority, every term, big entitlement savings. The problem we have is we can't get these things through the Senate.
As promised, Sarah Sanders.
Have over 350 companies that have announced wage increases, bonuses, new hiring, or increased retirement benefits as a direct result of tax reform, which not a single Democrat supported. These announcements have affected over 4 million American workers. The president is working to build an economy that works for all Americans. The tax cuts and reforms are a big part of that, and so is infrastructure. As you all saw yesterday, the president unveiled a legislative outline for rebuilding infrastructure in America. To cure decades of neglect, we are committed to quickly building a safe, reliable, and modern infrastructure to meet the needs of the American people and to fuel economic growth. And to help make this possible, we have a very special announcement today. In keeping with his campaign pledge, the president donates his salary on a quarterly basis to further work being done on important projects. Most recently, the president donated his third quarter salary to help the Department of Health and Human Services combat the opioid epidemic. Prior to that, he donated to the Department of Education and the National Park Service. And today, the president is proud to donate his fourth quarter salary, 2017 salary, to the Department of Transportation to support their programs to rebuild and modernize our crumbling infrastructure. Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao is here to accept the check. I'd like to bring her up to say a few words, take a couple of questions on infrastructure and about how these funds will be used. And I trust that you'll stay on topic, and then I'll be back up afterwards to answer your questions on the news of the day. That, Secretary Chao, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. We'll have to get this check here and with all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I'm accompanied here, in case you were wondering, by two officials of the U.S. Department of Transportation.